A writer and podcast host with a passion for the local church. He serves as the lead pastor of Beulah Alliance Church in Edmonton, and has written a number of books, including his most recent one called The Discipleship Opportunity, leading a Great Commission church in a post-everything world. He's currently working on a doctorate of ministry in spiritual formation and relational neuroscience.
Mm.
How's that sound like for a dissertation? Yeah, Daniel lives with his wife, Christina, and their three children in Edmonton. And so, Daniel, glad you could make it. Welcome aboard. And it's been great getting to know you. So, if you wouldn't mind taking, yeah, the next 10 minutes or so to just give us an overview of your new book. And just let me just clarify that, as mentioned earlier, in the fall, we're going to be doing a cohort going through Daniel's book, a 7-week course to get into a deep dive together. So go ahead, Daniel, over to you,
Awesome.
and then we'll have a few minutes for Q&A afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. And it's so great to be with all of you. When it comes to discipleship, so often people get it confused, right? They're like, okay, are we talking about discipleship or are we talking about assimilation? How do we help people get connected? We know that the work of formation is done through people, but it's done by the Holy Spirit. So when we think about the folks that are in our congregations and the folks that we are trying to reach in our neighborhoods, I think a lot of times we often do what's been modeled to us, or we disciple the way that we've been discipled, or and obviously in a disciple making culture, we want to be able to continue to be disciples who make disciples who make disciples. But so many of us have different assumptions when it comes to how to disciple, or at what length, right? So, for example, when you have someone who uh, says yes to Jesus for the very first time, what do you use to disciple them? When someone asks, yeah, I've read the Bible, what chapter, what book, where do you turn them to? And a lot of that has to do with our assumptions. So one of the things that I wanted to do in this book was in this post, and it came out a couple of years ago by now, but one of the things that I wanted to do was challenge a lot of the assumptions that we in this post everything world that we're now living in. And obviously a lot of times, especially since COVID, a lot of times people will say post-pandemic, but I'm not even really talking about that. I'm just talking about the post everything that a lot of us are now living in. And we're thinking about, yeah, like what are the assumptions that I believe, right? For example, if my church isn't growing, am I doing something wrong? Right? Like these are the things that we think about, right? Like if the disciples that I've been discipling after multiplying the group, both of their like the folks who are in my group, they are now leading their own and they don't multiply. Did I do something wrong? Is it them? Did I, right? And we have all of these assumptions. So part of what I wanted to do in the book was challenge. I start off by challenging these assumptions that in a sense we would never say that they are at the same level as the gospel, but we almost function as if they are. In fact, when I was doing research for this, I went and did a lit review on about 50 to 70 years worth of church growth literature. And one of the comments, and I won't say who wrote it, um, but one of the comments that I came across was this: a shrinking church is a sinning church. Like, can you imagine if someone said that to you? Oh, yeah, you're down 10%. You must be sinning, pastor. Or like, and to automatically say a shrinking church is a sinning church. I mean, like, is that in the scriptures? So is Jesus sinning because the crowds thinned out when he preached? Like, what's going on with that? So with all of these assumptions, one of the things, can I share my screen?
That is a good question. Greg, can you give him the
Okay.
power?
Let me
Let me
just
try.
try it, and then if you can't, I'll fix it. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, you guys can see that. Okay, yeah. So one of the things that I want to show you here is this is the core of the book. And this content, what I formed here was really something that, and you know what, I'm not going to be speaking here for an hour. I think I only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to show this to you to give you a sense of where the book goes. So yes, I challenge the assumptions, and I have questions to help you. Be able to do some introspection to challenge the assumptions that you also are bringing into ministry. But here's something that I want to show you. Now, I mean, regardless of the all the boxes and all that stuff, if you just look at the bottom, that non-Christian to Christian line, what that is think of the Engel scale for those of you who are familiar with that paradigm. So the Engel scale, it's been around for a long time. It's a result of the church growth era and movement. But what the Engel scale shows you is, yeah, here's someone who is this far away from God. And then there's a point of conversion, and then there's a point of discipleship that happens afterwards. So if you think about the Engel scale from a non-Christian to Christian perspective, most of the time we have churches who are either heavily focused on reaching non-Christians, and then there are others who are heavily focused on reaching Christians. And a lot of times when we think about church ministry and models and frameworks and assumptions that different folks have, they're either targeting more on the non-Christian side or on the Christian side. So if you were to do a, what do you call them? Caricatures, those cartoon caricatures where your nose is larger than it ever is, or your forehead or your chin. And what the artist does is they overemphasize what stands out to them, right? Almost not that it's an accurate picture, but they're overemphasizing for effect. So if you think about churches who are heavily focused on reaching Christians, what would be the overemphasized caricature of them? Well, it would probably be, uh, if you were to draw a church, it would probably be roots that go down really deep. Because that would be the heart, that we would be deep, that we would be formed, that we would be that way. And then for churches on the non-Christian side that are targeting the non-Christians, the caricature would probably be, um, sorry, for the Christian side, it would be a small front door with really deep roots, right? Because this is caricature. And then for the non-Christian side, it would be a gigantic door, maybe double door. Maybe there wouldn't even be any doors because everyone gets to come in, but then the roots would be very shallow, right? Over generalizations, caricatures. So what I wanted to do in this paradigm is help us understand that actually, as disciples and disciple makers, and as pastors and as church leaders, we actually don't just have non-Christians and Christians in our churches. We have uninterested non-Christians and Christians, and we also have interested non-Christians and Christians. Right? We have folks in our churches who are sleepers, right? They're asleep spiritually. They're not interested in anything related to God because they're asleep to all things spiritually. And then we have non-Christians who are interested. They're not yet awake. I'm talking about that language from Ephesians 4, awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light. They're not quite awake yet, but they are seeking. They're interested. They want to go to Alpha. They want to have conversations about prayer, about God, but they haven't made that decision to follow Jesus. And then we have folks in our neighborhoods and in our churches who are uninterested Christians, so they're the consumers, right? They're not quite interested in being disciples and disciple makers. They're just consuming. They're taking in, but they're not multiplying. And then we have interested Christians who are disciples and disciple makers who are interested about God's kingdom and seeing his kingdom come and his will be done. So if you were to look at this paradigm, essentially what I do in the book is spell all this out and propose a paradigm of ministry and discipleship whereby we focus on the interested. So instead of being churches that are focused on non-Christians or Christians, the idea is what would change in our discipleship and in our leadership if, as a church, we focused on the interested. If we stopped trying to do the work that ultimately the Holy Spirit does best in trying to make Jesus interesting again, right? To make Jesus compelling, to make the gospel compelling. Actually, we're not really that good at that. And it's the Holy Spirit who will stir that in people's hearts. What would it look like if we were to focus on the interested in our churches and our communities and we stopped expending energy on the uninterested? What do you think would change in the way that we disciple? What do you think would change in the way that we evangelize? What would change in the way that we preach? So that's essentially the Cole's notes on this.
Well,
Stefan, I'll
thank
throw it
you
back to you.
it's nice when the Cole's notes is given by the author. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And so that's a great overview of the book, Daniel. Thank you. And yeah, I confess that having been a pastor for 20 plus years, um, the church tends to focus mostly on the consumer,
Yep.
and so we develop consumeristic cultures because of the consumerist culture in which we are in, called Canada.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah. This I have like chapter headings that are they're verbs used to know how to deal and address with each of these. And my
mhm.
chapter heading for the consumer one, I wanted to call it "Screw the Consumers," because I've just been so upset by, just not
Uh,
really, right? No, like, not really, but there's kind of this sense of, oh, like you take up so much of my time. Can't you just be about the ways of Jesus and
yeah.
helping people like why are you complaining about this? Why is his email so long, right? And I wanted to do that, and the editors at Nav Press were like, how about we call it challenge the consumers? So appreciative for the navigators, the church ministries, the publishing side. And I was like, yeah, you know what? That's a bit more apt. I think that's more appropriate.
But you're definitely scratching an itch, Daniel. And so
Yeah.
I want to just give a few minutes for any questions that people might have for
Hmm.
Daniel.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
we might get to twist his arm to attend at least one of the sessions in the fall. But
Mhm.
anybody have any questions for him right now? Either raise your hand or just start talking, and we'll deal with it.
I have a question, Daniel. What does discipleship look like in your church? Because you've written the book, but you're also
Mhm.
a pastor. So how
Yeah.
are some ways that you have implemented, yeah, challenging the consumer, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Stefan mentioned that I'm doing my doctorate right now. And I mean, that's obviously not the conversation for today. But I bring that up because when I was doing my master's, like 12 years or 13 years ago or so, the research that I did was around discipleship pathways and paradigms for different sizes of churches. So the way, and I have a chapter on this in the book, but really everything that I wrote on this was on my previous one called No Silver Bullets. And it's the idea of first steps, next steps, and ongoing steps. So the whole idea is, and it comes down to the theological understanding that, I mean, the Holy Spirit, and this is 1 Corinthians 3, right? The Holy Spirit is the one who is going to grow and mature and form us, right? None of us can actually grow tomatoes, right? We can plant the seeds and we can water and we can have a trellis, but we can't actually grow it, right? We just cultivate
Yeah.
it. So it's the same with disciples, right? None of us can actually make disciples or grow disciples in that sense. We can cultivate, we can, so as pastors and church leaders, part of our thing is we can't actually disciple every single person in our church as much as I want to. But then we just fall into the same pattern that Moses did. And a Jethro is going to come. Stefan's our Jethro, right? Jethro's
Yeah.
going to come and be like, hey, you can't really do that. You're going to burn yourself out and others. So then what is the trellis so that we're not the disciples, the most mature disciples in our churches aren't people who just move to our churches from other churches,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that's a lot of what ends up happening, or they're there before we got there. So that's the idea of the first steps. Do we have the trellis or the gears of first steps, next steps, and ongoing steps in our churches? So that's how we do it at Beulah, for our different sizes of campuses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Thanks,
I think
Daniel.
Alan has a question.
Yep, I was just gonna give him a microphone. Go ahead, Daniel. Alan, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. Just want to ask, thank you, Daniel, for sharing that there are different types of disciple and disciples also, right? For
Mm-hmm.
example, there are, this is to the church context. Some of the, even here in Canada, right? So there's still immigration, and then there's a lot of Christians coming from Middle East, Asia,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Europe, right? And then they will be coming to our church to be
Mm-hmm.
discipled, and they would say, "Oh, we'd like to be disciples also."
Mm-hmm.
But the challenging part sometimes is that they have a different view of discipleship. Some would like to be disciple in the life of Christ, practical
Mm-hmm.
ministry, Christian practices or disciplines, but others, they would like to be discipled in theology and also
Mm-hmm.
with doctrines. So
Yeah.
how do you see that? How would you measure and also probably work with those two kinds of people who are, they say that they are mature, they like more of the meat rather than the
Yeah.
milk. So yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to uh there's these Western paradigms around, and I say Western, but it also applies heavily to Christians not from non-Western cultures. But because Christianity is so influenced by the West, there's so much of our paradigm around maturity that is tied to knowledge and deepening. And what's fascinating is Ian McGilchrist wrote this book. It's not a Christian book, but it's like about this thick. It's called The Master and His Emissary, and he talks about the role of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere in our brains and our functioning, and how that's actually shaped Western civilization. So I bring that up because Christianity, there's so many people who are like, yeah, I mean, I need to know more. I need to know more. And we all know that is it do Christians in the West really have a knowledge problem? I mean, there is that side of correcting heretical beliefs, but it really is more of a doing problem, right? If our people just learn how to love. I mean, what did Dallas Willard say? He said the mark of spiritual maturity is the ability to spontaneously love your enemy. I was like, what the heck, Dallas Willard? Like, seriously? Spontaneously love your enemy? Who can do that? That's
Pretty high
crazy
bar.
talk.
Pretty high
It's a
bar.
really high bar. But there's this sense where, yeah, how do we love? How do we how are we formed in community and with community? And so that's the piece, Alan, where how do you create a paradigm and culture of maturity where spiritual maturity is not it is as much learning as it is doing, right? And you're incorporating that from a left and a right hemisphere side of things. And the other half of church, the other side of church is a great book that touches on this a bit. But there's so much more around it.
Mhm. And a lot of people would like to stay in the comfort zone of gaining more knowledge
Oh yeah.
rather than applying what they're learning.
Yeah,
Oh,
like this weekend, for example, like we're going through Joseph. We've been doing it for like 11 weeks now. And my sermons are around 35 minutes, and I stopped, like my content was done at like 22 minutes. So for the next 10 to 12, 13 minutes, I actually led our people through a listening prayer sort of exercise, like a spiritual formation practice, where I was helping them learn how to savor in the presence of Christ
mhm.
and to be formed by him. And I was addressing notions where people were like, wait, what are you doing? You're stopping? Like, Daniel, give me more points. And I was like, yeah, I mean, there is that side of it, but we actually need to learn how to do what
Yeah.
this passage is talking about.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I was doing there is like this idea of like reaching and focusing on the interested. And when we stop worrying about the consumers, it's fascinating how that begins shifting our culture.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. We'll allow for one more question. Brian, I think you had
Yeah,
one. Yeah.
great. Thanks. Um, you've talked about sort of some of the assumptions that we make as a sort of as the class of Western Christians, but I guess I'm finding that we're getting a fractured culture, and if your particular congregation hasn't settled that out by people splitting in different directions,
Hmm.
I've got this mix of uh, I've moved from Ottawa to Aylmer, and Aylmer is a lot more blue collar than Ottawa is. And
Mm.
so there's less of a focus on academic Christianity. Um, but there are those who've been in very strict Baptist backgrounds previously, and getting the doctrine right has been a challenge for them in their past, and still looms large for them. But we've also got people with a strong charismatic background, and
Mm.
some of them that are would want you to turn off your brain when you come into church, because
Yeah.
it's what you feel in your heart that's most important. Um,
Yeah.
and doing discipleship, and you know, the chart that has the four sectors of the interested and uninterested and the Christian and non-Christian, there's a whole bunch of other axes there that
Yep.
affect who we're preaching to and how the message is going to be received. But
Mm.
also when you're trying to find a program that suits the interested, active people in the congregation, that group gets finally divided into what do they need and what are they
Yeah.
willing to undergo.
Hmm.
So I just wonder, in that fragmentation, uh,
Yeah.
how do you play it?
Yeah, it is interesting because when we think about what we would hope for all of our people, including ourselves, is that we are people who not only know theology and doctrine, but that we love the Lord our God with all our hearts, souls, minds, and our strength. Right? So we're not chucking our brains out at the door. We're not skipping the sermon because we sense a movement of the Holy Spirit and we're now going to sing for 2 hours, or have an hour long sermon and the worship is only a warm up, right? Like, how do we actually form our people to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, souls, minds, and strength that then lead to action? So part of it, Brian, is like, and this goes to the neuroscience stuff that I've been studying, where there are folks who are like more heavily left hemisphere oriented. So and this ties to our early childhood attachment. So it's like, hey, when we have people who come into our churches who want the meat and who want the knowledge and who want, there are those sorts of folks that is actually they're heavily favoring more left hemisphere. They might actually be more avoidantly attached. And there's this sense where they have a disconnect with their emotions. So safety and wholeness and comfort is actually a knowledge. From a spiritual maturity perspective, they actually need worship. They actually need to learn how to hear from the Holy Spirit. They need to learn how to reconcile with, they need to learn how to lament. They need to learn, like, there's all of these emotional sides of things that they're comfortable in the knowledge, and their nervous system, because in the first 2 to 3 years of our lives, our nervous systems are being shaped and formed by our primary caregivers. And but the relationship that we have with our primary caregivers, it's literally shaping how we function, how we learn, what we favor, and all of that. So it's natural that some people will come in and be like, yeah, I want the knowledge. I want to make sure that you're preaching it right. I want to do this. But maturity isn't actually that, even though that's where they're comfortable. And then you have other people who would be more right hemisphere focused. So they would often be more ambivalently, anxiously attached in their early childhood formation. And they're the ones who know how to read the room. They're the ones who are they understand emotions. They love worship. They love prayer. They love that side. And that's the sort of churches that they're often leaning toward. But what they actually need is doctrine. It's theology. It's right belief. But that's not what they're naturally going to go toward because it's not where they're comfortable. So the challenge for all of us is how do we make sure that our churches aren't one-sided, right? How do we make sure that we're actually not unintentionally based on our attachment and our leanings from a formation perspective, cultivating disciples like me who would much rather land and live in the land of theology and hour-long sermons. I would rather do that, but that's actually not helpful because we need holistic discipleship and maturity. So we need the both. And that's the challenge, right? Because we enter
Yeah,
into church
yeah.
context where it's more one or the other.
Yeah.
How do we disciple and lead toward a more holistic picture? But it's not actually just about saying, this is the way, or get out. I believe we need to create holistic disciples in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Sorry.
Brian. Brian, we're going to switch over to breakout groups now.
Yeah, sure.
And I just